that they are not forced to do so. To do that, as there is no law compelling them to do so. Well done, Bell Academy says it has shifted from paying its employees 4,000 pula to 5,000 pula. To discuss the feasibility of other companies in Botswana implementing a living wage of 4,000 pula or more, considering the current state of the economy and its impact on the business sustainability, I'm joined by an academic economist, Mr. Bame Boitshoko. Good evening and welcome once more to Botswana Tonight.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Yes.
Yeah.
We talk about Choppies, and I'm going to use this word deliberately, being the poster child of minimum wage / living wage. When people were saying, "Bana ba rona ha ba duelwe," we fingered Choppies. When Choppies did something, again, we're talking about will other people follow? Perhaps before we even talk about what the economy can afford and cannot afford, why do you think we've sort of made Choppies the poster child of poor wages? And now we're making the Choppies the poster child of, look at what Choppies has done, other people must follow suit.
I think, let me just comment firstly with the 4,000 pula living wage that they recently accomplished. I think you talked about another company that had from 4,000 to 5,000 as well, but they did not have a launch. Choppies had a launch. Choppies went through the stops and went on a challenge which was posed by His Excellency Dumaboko on that, and they took it upon themselves to do so, and they did so in the eyes of the media and in front of everybody, right? It wasn't just the press release, it was a whole launch which even was officiated by the president himself. So I think that's why it could be a poster child. But in terms of like the former, which is the issue of Bana ba rona ha ba duelwe, well, I can't really comment on that one because I think it's Choppies first and foremost is a private entity, public listed. So whatever internal, maybe it was an issue of maybe some people felt Tore Banaba exploitiva. I don't know. I just don't know. I can't really comment on that one as much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, yes, there's a living wage. Now there's so much debate around living wage, cost of company, minimum wage. Let's just confine ourselves to minimum wage versus minimum wage.
Living wage.
Minimum wage versus living wage, yes.
Right. So here's a difference, right? And I think most people now are privy to that information. Now, living wage ke molao, right? Ke se leng gore gormento a rona mo parlamente e dula ka molao a gore a mongwe le mongwe a duele a se ka duela go tlase ga selekanyo se. Basically, it is mandated either hourly rate if there are no fixed hours, or a monthly rate, right? If there are fixed hours to it of employment. You cannot be afforded to work or be paid, work and be paid below 1,800 pula in this particular instance. And genuinely, minimum wage, you avoid exploitation, right? You avoid you protect the welfare of the worker. And in that particular instance, also balancing out the realities of the economy of the nation as well. In this particular aspect, so we're trying to match that in that particular aspect. Now, however, with living wage is not mandated, right? Living wage, looking at the economic conditions, right, that a worker is subjected to outside of work, right, living, and the aim of such an index to ensure that there is decency within the life of a worker. Now, with living wage, it's not respective to the individual, like the minimum wage. It's respective to a typical family, right?
Okay.
Within a geographical location, right? So in this particular aspect, a living wage in Gaborone could not be the same as a living wage in Khanzi, right? And a living wage, again, is subject to saying there are 2 adults in a family, and only one of those adults works, right? A full-time job. And there are children of a certain age. So that makes the living wage aspect of things.
Okay.
So it also, again, fluctuates, right? It's not mandated, and it should never be mandated, right? Why? Because as much as, if I was to give you a typical example, between 2017 and 2018, the minimum wage in Botswana was around 3.8. I mean, sorry,
The
living wage was around
yes.
3,800. But within 2017, within 2018, it went down to 2,700 bula, right? Average, right? Average. So, according to international publications, the minimum wage is around, the living wage is around 7,000 bula, somewhere there, right? But then if you go towards Bokhalahadi, it's around 5,000 bula in a particular aspect, right? But the average now in the country, where does it stand? So that's where the difference is at. Is that the other one is mandated, and it's only pointed towards an individual. Olo khomotso, olo wana ka ntsalo, go sireletsa mo exploitation ya batho ba bangwe ba ba go hirileng go tirong. Re ka go ha bokana, o sentse re wa amogela bokana, kampo se ka ba thogela tla be exploitation. Living wage is khomotso ko lapeng o na le mang, go ntse jang ko lapeng, rente, dijo, diaparo, transportation, right? All those particular factors make up the living wage.
Okay. And I'm asking you this because I get a sense that perhaps we get lost. One would say, without understanding, we get lost in semantics. But according to your explanation, there are real differences here between a minimum wage and a living wage. And what Choppies has done is a living wage which is not mandated.
Which is not mandated.
And other businesses have come to say, okay, we'll also do a living wage which is not mandated. Whereas what the new administration is saying is we want something that's mandated in the shape of a minimum wage.
Right.
And there is a meeting point somewhere, but these are two
separate.
Two separate.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about, in the context of where we are as a country, as an economy, of course, the living wage will differ from city to city, town to town, geographically. But when we talk about the economy generally, what can we afford?
What can we afford as the citizens, or or you mean the companies in essence?
Yes.
That's a very good question, right? I think to answer that question, you need to ask ourselves where we are as a country. Before we can actually go out and say certain companies or private entities should take hold of that. We have a quite relatively high unemployment rate, especially within the youth, right? About over 27%, right? In that particular aspect, what are the implications of having an unemployment rate of that magnitude? It means that there's less disposable income. Let me say disposable income, right? There's less disposable income. Or there's less people with the purchasing power within the economy, right? In that particular aspect, who's going to buy the goods of those particular companies for them to try to increase the offerings a living wage more economy, right? Secondly, we have a fairly unbalanced economic structure, and I've always mentioned this. Our industries are fairly imbalanced. The most performing would be mining and tourism, right, with fairly high profits, because profit is a difference between expenses and revenue, right? So the more it is, the more we have leadway gets our operational expenses, which are now derived by the living wage expenses, right? i.e. what is now the common term or the buzzword, the cost to company, the CTC, right? As most, what it's been the word in the past 2 days. So in that particular aspect, if there's no breadth or leadway between expenses and revenue, which is profits, it's fairly impossible for me to offer a living wage, which is reflective of economic conditions in the country, right? So we have a fairly imbalanced economic structure. So unemployment. Thirdly, we have a fairly imbalanced individual structure, meaning that the difference between the rich and the poor is quite significant. Botswana is probably in the top 10 countries with a very high Gini coefficient, meaning that mohumi le motho le gore gongwe a itlhoka ga ba kgone there's a huge gap. Right. So go rala gore mohumi ene as much as a le madi o kgona go reka selekanyo se se helelang go gongwe mme ga ka ke a kgona go reka selekanyo se le gore se ka kgona go accomplish a certain person, meaning that if wena lo khomotso tsa wa semosung gona reka magunyana mabedi akere hela we hela go o siama sentle le boilo go gona go thogela. But imagine if it was khomotso and I sharing having the same amount of income, gona reka magunyana for ya, right? But I know there's a difference between that means rala go to hell.
Yeah. So let's just talk about the notion that you increase living wage, or we go at the minimum wage route, like you're saying, then we may find that companies are not able to keep employees, like they would have to slash employees, like they can't afford anymore. What have other countries done, and how are they able to deal and navigate this sort of conversations?
I think, let me just say this. We need to understand what informs living wage, right? I think it's upon organizations within the country, even I don't want to say the government, I want to say organizations within the country, either be your Choppies, either be Statistics Botswana, to take it upon themselves to understand that people, all right, and understand that people hampirana khomotso o duela bokae rente ya bokae ko lapeng o le jutsa bokae, spending patterns, maintenance and ke bokae, motlakase le metsi o dirisa metsi motlakase le metsi ke bokae, transportation o pama bokae o tsela fuela bokae, o maintain a koloi ga kae, those type of things. You look at the medical expenses and also looking at discretionary spending, which is for emergencies as well, this particular aspect. Gore gona no khomotso mo kgweding o gona go tsana mo teng ga letlo la ga bantsha bokae a ikadima kana go ngwadima ko metshelong kana dima kae go gona go sustain go botshelong jo. We need information, we need data. So we need to have organizations, not only the government, these organizations, law 4,000 pula, we need to understand what informed that particular 4,000 living wage. It's not, like I said, the living wage is it's not even that much. But
do we have that data? Because one of the things we struggle as a country is when you look for data, when you look for information, sometimes we are going as far back as 2018, and we are in 2025. Do we have the data that says for a living wage, this is what you ought to be looking at, this is what informs it? For a minimum wage, these are the variables, this is what informs it, or it's a thumb suck here?
Right, so minimum wage, generally, as it speaks, minimum wage conversation between the government or the politicians and representatives of workers. Living wage, it's human behavior, right? So in this particular aspect, I could simply say, confidently, the only indicator, the only source of information we can get to the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, which is from the food basket. We don't have that data that is up to date. The CPI thing based off a food basket, which is also outdated. So based off staple goods and foods in that particular aspect. So we need information which is real time. Who understand that spending, look about the budget like young in that particular moment. That's all we need. So we need to, like I said, transportation is not my dear kombi hell. Fuel behavior. Maintenance koloi. You understand? Even law those type of things, those kemadi. It's discretionary spending, that particular aspect, and how much do you save in a month as well, how much you tap into that particular savings account. So we need that particular data. We need to have structures in place to collect that data and make it real time for us to make those informed decisions, saying, "Me living wage like okay. Like I said, it fluctuates.
I think as the world evolves, we see that more organizations, particularly that are listed, there's a requirement for ESG reporting. And part of that is to say, beyond profit, what are we doing for our employees? What are we doing for communities within which we operate? What sort of corporate citizens do we have that we talk about a minimum wage and people are saying, but I'm not mandated by government. And yet there is a living wage, like you explained it, and where people are saying, but people simply cannot afford, we can't have 1.8 as a basis. What type of corporate citizen does it take to go the living route in lieu of ESG and everything else that comes with SDGs as well?
Let me like Irian, maybe we should not put blame on these corporate citizens, right? Because can't you information living wage like I stated, it's not there, right? As Botswana centric, it's not there. The census that are conducted maybe on a 5-year basis comes a little bit too late, right? So yes, they can, but what informs the 4,000? What informs the 5,000? We don't know that. If you were to ask them, I would like to have a conversation with them and ask them what informed that 4,000 or that 5,000.
Okay.
But we can't, yeah.
I suppose it is altruism then. Thank you so much. We were speaking to Bame Boitshoko about the 4,000 pula living wage and whether the economy as a collective could actually afford it and what informs that. I suppose it's a conversation that we'll continue to have right here on BTV News channel. Benson Putero follows at 7 o'clock with the news in Botswana.
This year's budget demands that we